to the education part of the Education and Communities meeting. This meeting has been held remotely and also in person and will be filmed and recorded for live and subsequent broadcast available through the Council's website. The Council is a data controller under the General Data Protection Regulations and Data Protection Act 2018. We broadcast and record Council meetings to fulfil our public task obligation to enable members of the public to observe the democratic process. Data collected during the process will be retained in accordance with the Council's published policies available through the Council's website. Members of the Council are reminded that they should follow the Council's established meeting protocols, including the use of the chat facility, and that the comments made in the chat facility are visible to all participants in the meeting, which may include members of the public who have also received invites to the meeting. Can I ask Diane to go for the roll call and then to go through apologies and declarations of interest, Diane?
We have apologies from Councillor Armstrong and Councillor Reynolds substituting. We will now move to an attendance roll call before proceeding to declarations of interest. Can the following members please indicate if they are present at the meeting either in person or remotely? Councillor Brennan.
Present in the meeting.
Councillor Cofferty.
Present in chamber.
Councillor Daisley.
Present remotely.
Councillor Law.
Present in chamber.
Councillor Maguire.
Present remotely.
Councillor McVeigh.
In chamber.
Councillor Moran.
In the chamber.
Councillor Quinn.
Present in the chamber.
Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Reynolds.
She's on the back.
Councillor Wilson. Sorry, Councillor Robertson.
Present in the chamber.
Councillor Wilson.
You sure? Present in the chamber.
Reverend Burt. Mr. Doherty.
Present in the chamber.
Reverend Donaldson. And Ms. McEwen.
Present online.
Are there any further declarations of interest? Any further declarations of interest?
Can I just check? Councillor Reynolds, Sandra, was that you online?
Yeah, it's trouble joining, so I've just joined just now. Yep.
Okay,
So
thanks,
present
Sandra. We'll
remotely.
make sure we note that. And any declarations of interest? None. Now, agenda item number 7 on our agenda is a presentation of the promise in virtual schools. I'll ask Michael to introduce Susan and for Susan to do a presentation. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. Thanks, Ruth. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for this opportunity to introduce Susan Chambers, who is the virtual head teacher of the virtual school in Inverclyde. We are almost coming to the point that we've had a virtual school in Inverclyde for a year, and we've obviously been urgent to present to you on its current work and some of the early signs of impact that we're seeing. And because she's a virtual head, she's here virtually. And if you're still utterly confused by what I mean by virtual head, then Susan will share her presentation and take you through a brief presentation on the key highlights of the work that she's doing.
What date is it? It's not April the 1st, is it?
No. Susan?
Thank you, Michael. I'm just going to share my screen. If you can just let me know that you can see it all right.
Yes, can see that.
That's great, thank you. So yeah, thank you very much for having me along today. As Michael said, we're approaching a year in post, and thought it would be a really key time to just pull together what the promise is all about, where the virtual school has come from, and what we're trying to achieve with that. So just to give you a little bit of context around the promise, I'm sure most of you will be aware of this. Back, in 2016, there was a commitment from the First Minister to look at how we can love our most vulnerable children more. What took part from there was a 3-year independent care review, with the promise then being launched in 2020. And what came through really on a national level was a recognition that we weren't doing enough to love and care for our care experienced young people, and that was leading to then harder adult life, and that had to be addressed. So it was a really thorough review. It took account of over 5,500 voices, spanned the full nation, and it really looked at mapping out what care felt and looked like for our young people, for families, for the workforce, all around the promise. And I think for us, from an education point of view, some of the really key points that came out from those findings and what we are sharing with our education colleagues just now, is that there was a recognition that some young people will never be able to stay with their parents. Some young people had also said that they wish they had been removed from their family sooner. And others who had experienced significant trauma had said that actually the removal from their family was the most traumatic thing that they had experienced in their life. And one of the big messages that's come from the promise and that we are taking forward at the minute is that we have to do a lot of work around changing language around care experienced young people. You'll have heard the term looked after young people a lot, and we're trying to move away from that. Young people are very clear that even the simplest of language that we use makes them feel disconnected and different from their non-care experienced peers. So words like a children's unit, or they're going on a placement, or contact with their family, and that term of lack itself, or lots of language that young people identified and that we are trying to change in Inverclyde. This is a really busy slide, but just to pull together, this is the plan that we're working from at the minute. You'll see it spans from 2021 to 24, so we are coming towards the kind of latter part of that. There are 80 calls to action within that plan, but for me in the virtual school role, looking at those 5 areas, my real responsibility and my real role is to support that right to an education that sits within that good childhood column, and really looking at what are the barriers to that education and how we can reduce them. It also spans, when we're looking at supporting the workforce, there's a definite role to play in supporting our teachers, supporting anyone that works within our school communities, working alongside social work colleagues, to really look at what training, what understanding do we need in order to really support our young people particularly well. And again, within that building capacity column, the virtual school has a very clear and present role in the work that we're doing around our children's hearing system, looking at the policy that sits behind our care experienced young people, and looking at how we can adapt that and change that. And just to give you a kind of an Inverclyde perspective, our young people came up with 5 pledges specific to Inverclyde young people. And just to highlight, certainly in this first year of the role, very much I'm looking at how do I help those working with our young people to understand them and their experiences, because our young people within Inverclyde have highlighted that as something that they require help with, that they feel is really important. They struggle with that. They struggle to always talk, as I'm sure you can understand, about some of their experiences, but they do want us to talk about it, and they do want us to understand, and they do want us to change our practice. So that's very much at the heart of what the virtual school has been doing. So to give you a bit of context, the virtual school is the young people. So this is how the virtual school is broken up. This is the context. So any young person who has been care experienced at any point in their life sit within the virtual school role, which I am leading. They will attend their own establishment, their own school, whether it's nursery, primary, secondary, but I will have that joint responsibility and that kind of overview for that cohort. So you'll see there are 277 currently, previously looked after young people. That cohort there, that number will only ever go up. as a young person comes off of compulsory measures, that will always stay on their record. And that's because regardless of whether you're currently looked after or currently care experienced or previously, you have an entitlement, and it's important for the workforce and the young people around, or the staff around you, to understand that's part of your journey so that you can get support that you're entitled to. So within that previous cohort, you will have some young people who have no social work involvement. You'll have some that are maybe working still voluntary, but there's no need for compulsory measures. You may have young people who have a child protection investigation, but again, it's not under that compulsory measure. Or you may have some young people and families who are requiring no support at all, as things within the family have significantly improved. When you look at the young people who are looked after away from home, that number has stayed relatively stabilised in the time that I've been in the virtual school. It changes slightly, but it is sitting around that kind of just over the 100 mark. So that will be our young people who are in formal kinship arrangements, who are in foster care, who are living in residential houses either within or without, or who are being looked after by a family relative out with their family home. And then we have our looked after at home cohort. That has reduced by 20 since the virtual school started. Again, we are trying to work to a no order principle from our social work colleagues. So really we're trying to reduce that number as much as possible, to put in the kind of early intervention to make sure families are supported. But that number there, so if they're stopped being looked after at home, they would then come into the previously category, which is why that continues to go up. That is the kind of numbers that the virtual school, the numbers that I'm having responsibility for at the minute. So I've kind of touched on this, that my role is to have that joint and shared responsibility for trying to improve outcomes for young people. It's very much in line with one of the key areas for education that the Promise have outlined, is that part at the bottom there that's highlighted. It's about trying to make sure there are no barriers to their engagement with education, and that they're known, cherished and loved by schools. And I have a joint responsibility with all the schools, working alongside our social work colleagues to try and really get to grips with what are the barriers within Inverclyde, what is stopping these young people being able to thrive at school. The easier part of that is recognising the barriers that are within school, and we'll touch on that later. But as you know, there are huge barriers that these young people are facing, and we're really trying just now to really dig down and get to the bottom of what the themes are of that, what really is stopping these young people from being successful. Mainly, I've been working with our education colleagues, social work colleagues, our adoption, foster, through care colleagues, our educational psychologists. And really, this first part of the role, this first year, has been about really trying to gather data, take intelligence that we've learned, and start to plan what our actions need to be to help remove those barriers, but also just to improve our working with our colleagues. So when we took the role on, Michael and I kind of made a decision that this was to be a kind of strategic role. We really had to look at policies and processes, and some of the other areas that we chose to look at, we've pulled directly from the Promise. We are looking at trying to reduce the number of exclusions for this particular cohort. We are trying to address the attendance. It is a significant issue. We'll touch on that in a minute. And also we're trying to look at supporting our young people into these sustained destinations. So in line with what we would be doing with our non-care experience cohort, but really trying to dig a wee bit deeper and get a better sense of why for some of these measures, they are below their non-care experienced peers. I would say that, certainly for those first two targets, we absolutely I've got confidence that the schools absolutely know who these young people are, and we have put in really robust processes and policies within the schools to make sure that they understand who the young people are, and that we are tracking and monitoring them, and we are doing that jointly between myself and the schools. So these are, just to go more specifically into the Promise itself, these are the 6 areas that they've been explicit about in terms of education, and this is what we need to be able to evidence at the end of 2024 in terms of have we achieved these. because after 2024, the next plan will come out and we'll have, you know, other areas. So this is these are very much about the kind of groundwork, looking at, you know, obviously you have that overarching area that I've spoken about how do we cherish them, how do we love them, how do we make sure those barriers are down. But you'll see there it's very much about reducing exclusion, making sure we're tracking that attendance and attainment. Do the young people have a role within our school community? Are they participating in our school community? And that support post-school into those destinations. One of the really key pieces of work that we've undertaken, and it's been myself and Leslie Ellis, who's the I Promise team manager. We're very fortunate in some ways, and because of the size of the authority, we have committed to going round to all our establishments face to face and speaking to every education member of staff within each school. And it's an awareness raising session similar to what I'm doing here, but really digging into what it means for those young people to be care experienced and how that might present itself in a school context, and what our expectation is for a school to be able to support them. We have wonderful education staff in all our schools, and they, you know, they absolutely understand, you know, what it means to be care experienced. But I guess the awareness raising sessions that we've taken part in and that we've done, it's really about trying to reduce that stigma, raise that awareness, and reduce there's sometimes a sense of fear around what we can talk about, what we can share with our care experienced young people, and we're trying to get that message out that the promise is really clear. And we have been, you know, it's very, very explicit that we have to show love and show that we cherish these young people, and our young people in Inverclyde have been very clear with us that they want us to know that and want us to understand that. So it's about trying to get that message out, and not to then ask every member of school staff to be speaking explicitly to every care experienced young person about what's happened to them or how they're feeling, but to have that real understanding of what it means, how it may present, and I guess what their responses should be. We've really, as I touched on, we've really looked at the data that we hold for these young people. I've spent a long time kind of cross-examining the social work data and the education data to make sure that that's aligned, so that we can be very confident that we know exactly who our young people are, both those who are living in Inverclyde and those living out with Inverclyde. And being able to make sure that we've got confidence in that data has allowed us to then start looking at what the data is telling us. And part of my role has been to then go out and support and challenge with schools and really look at what are we doing to overcome, you know, what this data is saying. We also undertook a review of the corporate parent teachers team. They sit within the virtual school now. That's obviously been a change. Historically, they have always worked with young people who are on a compulsory supervision order, who are on compulsory measures. The review of that corporate parent team, it's very clear that there is a need for that, and you know, they have great relationships with these young people. We're at a point where we're maybe looking at how we incorporate that team more into the wider cohort of the virtual school, and perhaps look at, we have young people within this cohort who maybe have really low attendance, who are not making it to school, and that team very much support with those young people who can't attend school. It's about how we broaden that and how we widen that support. We are looking at currently attendance within previously looked after young people. As you saw at the start, that's one of our biggest cohorts. So we're doing a small test of change across the secondary schools to really start to look at getting to grips with what our barriers are, what is causing our young people to not come to school, and trying to get to grips with what those themes are in order that the schools can then put in appropriate responses to try and support that attendance. Some of the themes that are coming through within this particular cohort of previously looked after is condoned absence, where we're facing families who maybe had a challenging time at school themselves, and maybe don't have the same understanding of the importance of school. We have some young people who it's truancy and it's spread throughout the week. We have mental health and anxiety, both for the young person and the parents. We have a lack of school connectedness coming through, young people who have struggled to feel part of a school community, and that's then coming through in their lack of attendance at school. We're also at a point where going out to meet with all the schools to really look at what interventions are in place for our young people who are care experienced. Again, that's within this role to try and start to pull together a sense of how we are tackling that as an authority across Inverclyde, and that will allow me to start to share practice and I suppose bring best practice to the fore to make sure that there's equity across all our care experienced young people and the support that they're getting within schools, and just that kind of general making sure that there is that robust tracking. Schools really are excellent at tracking and monitoring all of their attendance and their attainment. What I'm asking them to do is, when they are looking at that tracking, to really spend a wee bit of extra time on that care experience cohort through that care experience lens to really look at what their journey's like and anything else that we can do about that. In terms of exclusion, this is one of the early pieces of work that we did. We are trying to reduce it. The promise is very clear that eventually they would like to see no care experienced young person excluded. We are looking to reduce it in our first year. We've put a process in whereby, if a school is considering exclusion as an option for a care experienced young person, that they will have a discussion with myself. The decision will always lie with a head teacher of their school, but it's very much about trying to look at what has led to the point where this young person is potentially going to be excluded from school, and most importantly, what does their plan look like, what's going to change when they come back, and what support they maybe require. So that's been in place, and I think the positive part of that is just about really supporting our head teachers, supporting our schools to really consider all the options. And our schools are working really hard at trying to find alternatives, because there is an absolute understanding and an absolute, the desire to not exclude a care experienced young person, because we are increasing that understanding of these young people quite often already feel disconnected, as I've said, excluded from school life. So there is an absolute desire to make this better. There is there will absolutely be times where if there is a crisis, and we are very clear that if a care experienced young person was to be excluded, that sometimes it is necessary if it was a safety concern. But broadly speaking, the process is working well, and the schools are engaging in it, and we are seeing a reduction at the minute. Again, when it comes to that positive destinations, it's just really about making sure that care experienced young people are on that table, that they're part of the work that we're doing around additional support needs. They need support going into workforce, they need support going into college. They are entitled to that kind of 2-year planning process to make sure that all the key partners that need to know about these young people know about that. So it's very much about trying to increase that understanding at the level of post-school. And our kind of next step with that is to start to work with our colleagues within the college on how to emulate, I suppose, the support. Our care experienced young people in secondary schools will leave secondary school where they've been very well nurtured and very well supported, and those staff in that school have had 6 years to get to know that young person. And it's about how do we support them from that environment into their next environment, whether that be college or a workplace, and what that might look like. And again, it's just about that awareness raising at this point. Out with the promise, just a couple of things to touch on. This role is very much about kind of trying to bridge education and social work together, and I think that's certainly becoming a big part of the job. We have done a couple of joint pieces of work recently, and they've been really well received. We've had really good feedback from everyone involved, and that's very much about the working on child's plans, looking at how we can streamline that, looking at from an education perspective, how we access social work, and our next on our next table, we're looking at attendance, because as I said earlier, we have concerns around the kind of low levels of attendance for our currently looked after young people who do have social work support. So we're looking at how we can kind of bring together education and social work and learn from each other, and maybe have a more joined up approach to that. We're also looking at we have 27 young people who are living out with the authority just now and being educated. So again, we're trying to find a way of being able to track and monitor them the same way as if they were in an Inverclyde school, and also trying to link in with the schools and where they are in terms of that accountability, that support and challenge, and making sure that they have got access to everything they need to thrive, with the hope that many of those young people will eventually return to Inverclyde. There is a virtual school national network that is growing all the time. There's now 23 virtual heads who have just been appointed across the nation. So it's definitely something that is growing from authority to authority, and we are really starting to be able to influence pieces of work around care experience. Recently we've published a paper on if a young person does come in or out of authority, and really starting to look at how we make these situations more consistent across the authority, so that we have consistency not only in the virtual school role but in the support that young people are accessing. There are some challenging cases that I'm supporting schools or social work staff with, and again, obviously it wouldn't be appropriate for me to get involved in all cases, but if I can help, I'm more than happy to. Again, as I touched on, we're doing quite a lot of work just now with the Children's Reporter, the Children's Hearing System, with panel members, trying to bring them. We're going to do a pilot where they're going to come in and speak to some of our schools. They're coming to speak to our education staff about that whole process, and just kind of everything that we're doing around that is just about trying to, again, break down that stigma and take away any kind of mystery around care experience. So as much as we're coming to the end of the first year, it's difficult to kind of have that kind of hard data as yet for that impact in order to measure, but there certainly are a lot of soft indicators coming through from feedback from staff, from some of the pieces of work undertaken, and just a real sense from myself that, you know, I am confident that the confidence levels have raised for our education staff in terms of not only who the young people are, but the understanding of them, and I suppose how they fit into that. So that's me.
Susan, I thank you very much for that presentation. I think from an elected member's point of view, I recognise there was new elected members that just joined the committee, especially from May, and I wanted them to recognise what we're actually doing with the virtual schools and how important our commitment is to the promise, and what part education play in the promise as well. So what I'll do is I'll open up to questions, if that's okay, Susan.
Absolutely,
and I'll ask members of the one. I've got Kirsty first, and then Francesca. Kirsty.
Thank you, Convener. I don't actually have a question, but I just wanted to say, as someone who grew up in the care of an extended family, I just want to thank you and commend you for the invaluable work you're doing for the care experience young people of Inverclyde. It's great to see this being recognised as an issue many kids face, and that the support is in place to make their experience as positive as possible, which they can hopefully take through their lives with them.
So thanks.
Thank you very much.
Kirsty. Francesca.
Thanks very much, Convener, and thanks very much, Susan. Apologies if I missed this on one of the slides, and I'm not sure if you'll be able to say too much in terms of, I suppose, GDPR and information sharing, but what really came across for me there was about, you know, young people at the centre and that equity of support. I wondered if you could say anything about the sort of equal numbers of care experience young people linked with institutions across Inverclyde, and if there are equal numbers, or if there's a concentration, perhaps in particular primaries and secondaries. I was thinking if there are schools...
Sorry, Convener, through you, I don't think it would be appropriate to sort of focus on any particular educational establishments. Apologies.
Okay, yeah.
I wonder if I'll finish.
Yeah.
I think what I was thinking was if there are particular schools with greater numbers, I was just wanting to ask about additional supports in place for those schools so that we are producing the best outcomes for young people. And my second part of my question is probably a bit less sort of not controversial, but maybe easier to answer, was just I was wondering if the virtual school is linked also with the early years institutions, or if it's purely primaries and secondaries. And thanks very much for the presentation.
Susan.
Yeah, so it is linked with early years, certainly. Sorry if that didn't come through in the presentation, but no, absolutely, we are supporting with our early years colleagues. In terms of the numbers within schools, that would really be for schools to kind of use their PEF funding and how they use that in a way that's equitable to the young people within their schools.
Okay. Can I bring Elizabeth and then Lynn? Elizabeth?
Thanks. I've got a few questions. Is that all right? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Susan. Thank you for the presentation. It is really great to see what the team are doing. I'll maybe just do them one at a time if that's okay. Sure. Take them. So first one is me going back about 6 or 7 years when I was an officer rather than a counsellor, and we tried really hard to make sure that every looked after young person got an AT5 and not an AT5, I wish, an AT3 in English and Maths. We knew that the statistics for young people who were looked after away from home were likely to be about 1/10 of those who were mainstream children, if you like, and the outcomes for children who were looked after at home were 1/10 of those. That was the context that I worked in as an officer. My first question is, do we know that those aspirations and those trajectories have demonstrably changed over the 6 or 7 years?
The short answer would be there are absolutely still the gap. The gap is still there. I would say that with the work that we're doing, there's certainly more focus, and I guess what there's still that focus on making sure that they have those core subjects, that English and Maths. But I guess I would say between the last 6 and 7 years, and this is talking from my post before this and as a deputy in Inverclyde Academy, and within obviously the last kind of year, I would certainly say that we're looking at broadening those kind of curricular experiences more, and moving away from that kind of, we have much more options now. We have modern apprenticeships, etc., to support young people with. We have other options in terms of work placements and college, etc. So I would say yes, that there is still that focus on ensuring that they have core subjects, and I would say that's at school what the corporate parent team drive. They have a specific focus on S4 pupils, but the gap is still there, and that's very much part of, I guess, the findings of the promise and why we are moving to virtual schools, to really start to look at what else can be done from an education point of view to support that.
Can I bring Ruth in to add
Sure.
to my corporate nature? Sorry.
Through you, convener. Yes, I remember those days when the level 3 or national 3 was all the only time we ever looked at dividing the achievements, and those days have changed. And I have to say it's through to the amount of data we have. We look at national 4s, national 5s, highers, and you'll see even nationally in the local government benchmarking framework, you'll see it's split up by SIMD and also looked after children as well. We look at attendance linked to looked after children. We look at almost every measure, including health and wellbeing, linked, and we divide it by those who looked after at home and looked after away from home. So our ability to use and crunch the data has moved on hugely since those days, when if they got a national 3, that was okay, and that's the only box that was ticked. Yeah.
So what you're actually saying is, when Elizabeth was an officer, that was the bad days. Michael, do you want to add something?
Just a further issue, Councillor Roberts. So we have an annual student meeting with every establishment in the authority, and we have a face-to-face meeting, myself and with every secondary school, and we've actually now brought Susan into those meetings, so they've become longer than they ever were. We get half an hour at the beginning of that meeting where we talk solely about that school, its key experience cohort, some of the challenges and solutions and actions that have been taken, and we look at the data around that cohort, and then we move on to the rest of the meeting at that point. So we're holding the virtual head and the head together, responsible for the key experience children in their school.
Okay, Elizabeth, you.
That's helpful, and we all know that these are better days now that I'm on this side. Good for the councillor. My second point is actually one of the slides that you had, Susan, where when the first bullet point on one of the progress slides showed attendance, and it said 68% of the cohort for over 85% attendance, and I'm just checking, is that the target, or is that where we currently are?
Sorry, that was my fault for not explaining that. Yeah, so the attendance specific project that we're doing with the secondary schools to look at previously looked after, the reason we chose previously looked after young people was the size of the cohort, but also those young people may not have any support out with school. So we're trying to look at how we can capitalise on the school support for that from an attendance point of view. No, that's the current picture. So 68% of that cohort are over the 85, but we were hoping to extend that further to get as many as possible over the 85% mark for the end of the year.
That's brilliant, thank you. And the last thing, it's not even a question, it's just a comment. When we're looking at taking away barriers, just that are different calls with the time of young people who are care experienced. You know, other children don't have to go to children's hearings, other children don't have to go for lab medicals during the course of a school day. These things are part of our system and they're right and proper because we keep our children safe, but there are different calls that children have on their time. There are disruptions to their school day that other children just simply do not have. And so I don't know how we remove barriers when systemically these safeguards and really important points of safety and care are there, but I don't know how we square that circle.
Yeah, and that point that you're making is something that we are discussing when we're putting together our Better Hearings group, and it is very much about I don't have the exact figures, but the percentage of young people who are now choosing not to attend our hearings is increasing, and we're really trying to get the bottom of why that is, and some of that absolutely categorically will be what you're saying. It's that stigma around having to leave school to go to a hearing and then potentially go back to school, and we're having those discussions about how can we support that and how can we make that easier for a young person. And it's not that you're absolutely spot on that there's not a quick fix to that, because they're absolutely necessary and these are absolutely crucial. But I suppose what I would say is the kind of wider team that are looking at the promise and looking at hearings are very much, you know, saying exactly what you're saying, and we're certainly on the radar of what we can do within the parameters that we're working with to try and reduce that stigma and taking them out of school for those types of things. You're spot on.
Thanks, okay. Lynn?
Yeah, thanks. I've got a couple of things as well. First of all, Susan, thanks for the presentation. I think we're now clearer in our head. Just hearing that word virtual just means so many different things to different people. So really, thanks for that. And also, clearly as corporate parents, we have a responsibility for our care experienced kids. So it's always good to hear, you know, that someone else is in effect delivering that responsibility for us. So it is really reassuring as a corporate parent. I've just got a question about the relationship. So the one thing that didn't come out to me is the relationship with the care experienced child. So do they still have the relationships with the school? How does that work? Do you meet them regularly? So I'm trying to understand whether is it purely strategic or there is a relationship with the child as well.
Yeah, so the young people, the children, young people still attend their own school, and I'm sure, as you can imagine, you know, for some of these young people, they have many adults involved in their life and many adults supporting with them. So certainly in this first year, it's been much more of a kind of strategic and planning role and working with the adults and the workforce around the young person. Rather than that kind of operational working with the young people. There are cases where I will be meeting with young people and have met with young people to maybe gather their voice or to be part of their wider TAC meeting. But mainly it's supporting the adults who already support the young person.
Right, great, thanks. So the other thing you talked about helping others to understand me, and it was really good to hear about the sessions you're doing with the adults in their life and explain that. So I'm just trying to unpick that. Is there any awareness training for the pupils? So what kind of support? Because I'm just trying, when you're talking about exclusions, for instance, you know, and clearly for very valid reasons, you're trying to reduce the number of exclusions. But I think it's also important for the peer group to understand, you know, why there was a different rule for this child than another child. So I think our pupils will, if they understand it's about equity and equality, I think that will be really helpful for their peer groups and making sure that the other young people around them understand that as well.
Yeah, so yeah, the difficulty is, again, it's about that stigma, and we've talked around this quite a wee bit of, you know, how do we gather that pupil voice and how do we really ensure that our care experienced young people understand, you know, what's in place for them. But what we're doing after the Easter holidays, we are with the Children's Rights Officer and Your Voice, we have planned to start drop-in groups within the secondary schools. There already is one or a young person's group within Ailey Mill, but we're starting with secondary school and we might go to upper primary depending how it goes. But we're trying to get in and who absolutely own their care experience and want to talk about it and want to tell you what needs to change. So we're trying to kind of capture those young people in each school and develop this group. Alongside that, we have our Proud to Care group who are going to develop a video, and that will be delivered into PSE, and it's very much, as you said, it's to be delivered to all young people, but maybe has a message specifically to the care experienced young person who's sitting within that classroom, and it's about that very thing. We're very clear that we have to reduce that stigma, and that we need to have that shared understanding. So that is work that's in progress. We felt there's been a couple of videos that have been done by our young people, and we feel that they're really impactful. So we wanted it to come from young people, and have them be part of that development and have them, I suppose, help us to understand what would help them in terms of what do they want their peers to know. So no, you're absolutely right. It's a definite piece of work that's on our radar that we hope to have completed through the summer term.
Right, great, last one, I promise. So this one is probably an ask. So it was really clear about the language was really important. So as corporate parents, and I'm you know, conscious that we're sitting here having these discussions about our care experienced young people. So it's probably an ask. Could we have, I'm not sure if it's under HSCP and under Leslie's area, but some sort of list, you know, this is what we used to say and this is what we prefer. I know there's a little video which kind of does that, but it'd be really good for us to, here's the language that we really should use so that we can take responsibility for that ourselves and make sure that we as corporate parents are using the right language. So that's a wee bit of an ask, maybe some homework, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. There is a video that our young people developed, but there are kind of jargon buster documents and things that have been created to kind of sit alongside that. So we can absolutely get that to you, no problem.
Great, thanks a lot.
Okay, Lynn. David.
Yeah. Thank you, Susan. That was all very interesting, and it looks to me as though it's well worth running the time through the project. Can you tell me, Susan, at the end of it, or say after 3 years, how will you measure success or failure?
First and foremost, we'll be using the data, so we will be looking to see, has there been an increase in attendance at school? Has there been an increase in our care experienced young people who have gone on to a supported and sustained destination? Have we reduced exclusions? Do we have a reduction in young people who are, you know, I'm very much a small part of this, but in terms of those who are looked after away from home, there will be soft indicators as well. You know, there will absolutely be how young people feel. It'll be really important to kind of gather their voice and hear what their journey's been like since the virtual school has been put in place. I've already kind of gathered quite a lot of views from social workers, from education staff, and I will continue to do that in terms of what they need from a support point of view, and for them to measure their understanding, their knowledge, any changes that they've made. So there are things that are already underway, but it will very much be about being able to I suppose to feel those tangible changes that have been made, hopefully.
Okay, I'll bring Michael in first of all, because he could add to that as well.
Is he desperate to come in?
Yes.
Just to build on that, as a school, there is a plan for the schools. There are targets to get within the school, the plan. There will also be a standards and quality report written about the work of the school on an annual basis. And as well as that, a key priority of the current children's service plan has been around care experienced young people, so there are obviously targets and measures within that. We also have a kind of governance group that sits around Susan, which has been about supporting and challenging the establishment of the virtual school, and members of that include head teachers, as well as myself, colleagues in the HSCP, so Children's Services. So there's a number of different mechanisms by which there are clear indicators, KPIs set out that sit against care experience junkie.
Thank you, that's helpful. Just one other question, I've got two more questions, Susan. You said there's 27 children out of Inverclyde. What does that mean? Where are they? Where are they living?
So they're living in a range of places. So what that means is that they have moved out of Inverclyde, but they are responsibility of Inverclyde. They have a social worker connected to Inverclyde. They are under a compulsory supervision order instructed by Inverclyde, but they may have left the authority to go to some education establishments for support or some residential houses for support. So it's a very mixed picture. Places that you'll have, local places you may have heard of, such as the Kibble, Cross Street School in Erskine, Spark of Genius, Asperis Children's House. So it is a varied picture depending on the need of the child.
Thank you. With regard to exclusions, I was pleased to hear you saying that it's still the responsibility of the head teachers. You did mention safety along with exclusion. Does safety take priority over thoroughly bad behaviour?
So the safety comes from, we have clear guidance, including Engaged and Involved, Part 3 from the Scottish Government, that kind of lays out our guidance in terms of exclusion. And one of the key areas it outlines for us, and what we look at is about if a young person is out with the building, we're looking at what is the purpose of that exclusion. So if that young person is out with the school, what can we do in that time? What are the changes that need to be made in that time before that young person comes back? And it's very much about preventing the situation happening again for that young person, for the school community. It's about having time to plan and prepare for that young person coming back. And that would tend to lie within areas where there were changes to be made under the umbrella of safety.
And
Thank you, Susan.
I will bring Ruth in here too.
Well, these are the sort of questions that we get from our constituents.
And to be clear, a head teacher has the responsibility to exclude, and there are certain legal parameters for the exclusion taking place, and it should always be for every child as the last resort.
Yeah.
Thank you. My only other observation is that we are spending a lot at the bottom of the tree. We've got this, we've got PEF, we've got Attainment Challenge, a lot of money getting spent to raise the bottom level. We cannot ignore the bright children in our schools. They've still got to be encouraged.
I think you're assuming that
So that's observation.
I think you're assuming that these aren't bright children. These can be some of the most brightest children within Inverclyde. I'm sorry, I could get angry at you, David. I'm not. These could be some of the most brightest children within Inverclyde, and all we really need to do is make sure they have that ability to show their potential. And I think that's what Susan, what Michael, and what we are as councillors, is that corporate parent role is meant to do. I'm not going to say any more because I get a wee bit angry at this. So I'll not. Sorry, I was going to. Did you want to come in, Lynn? Sorry.
Yeah, just in response, I need to say something. So last week I took part in an NHS training session. It was delivered by NES, which is the education folk link to the NHS. And it was about introducing a trauma-informed practice. Now, a lot of them was members from education, so I kind of, first of all, I thought, right, what am I doing here? But anyway, any education is always good. So it was about introducing trauma-informed practice. It was understanding trauma and how people respond to trauma. So we don't have bad behaviour, we have reactions to trauma. So I think actually I should be there, because there's something to do with introducing trauma-informed practice in our committees and the questions we ask and the responses. So David, this is not directed at you, but I just had to say that. So maybe we should be a bit more understanding, and we've just talked about language. So language is really important. and so is to understand and be empathetic with people's, you know, where people have come from and the things that they're dealing with. You don't know around this room what experiences that people have and the trauma they potentially had in their childhood. So we need to be conscious that we are supposed to be leaders in our community. So we need to lead properly here and be empathetic and be careful with the language that we use. That's it. Thanks.
It just leaves me, there's nothing on the chat. Can I just thank Susan very much? And can I just say to members, I hope they did find this rewarding, because I think it's on us all to learn more about our virtual schools and our commitment to the promise as well, third anniversary of the promise. And I think this is tried to show our commitment. So I hope you don't mind it. It's taking a wee bit of time, but I think it's important as well. So can I thank you very much, Nat? And can I thank Susan very much? Susan, it's been a privilege listening to you today, so thank you very much, Nat.
Thank you for giving me the time. Thanks.
It is, yeah, different. I'd say, yeah.
Okay, and we'll give Elizabeth a minute to come back. And again, I hope members can understand that I thought myself, Michael and Ruth and the vice conveners thought it was important on the third anniversary promise that we, especially for the newer members coming in as well, to hear about our virtual school, to hear about the work we're doing and supporting our young people as well. So I hope it was 50 minutes worthwhile for everybody as well. I'll give Elizabeth 5 minutes to come back.
If you're a CC on that, you know, I went a 3-day course with children's trauma through the council, and I got a certificate at the end of it. But it really gave you a different insight. And so what I'm saying is there facilities available for new councillors, so they could maybe get an opportunity to go along with courses, you know, because it certainly changed my mind, I have to say.
I'll bring Ruth into that, but Karen is actually going through people's councillor development plans as we speak, I believe. So
there perhaps is some good news. We're revamping the children's services plan, as you're aware, for the 23-26 children's services plan. We've got a commitment to take forward trauma reform practice, and I've got a meeting next week to look at how we as a council can take forward trauma reform practice.
Yeah.
So there's
well, I should say, because of the adoption determinants panel, so I've this HSP Patriot, so maybe we can get someone off them.
I'm just going to look at Anne here. Am I allowed to give another couple of minutes, Anne? I don't want to fall foul of any of the standing orders of the council, just to give...
It's okay.
It's okay.
Oh, Councillor Robertson's coming back in.
Okay, good. Thank you. Can I move to agenda item number 8, which is the Education Revenue Budget Report. And can I ask Ian to introduce the report? Ian?
Thanks, Convener. So this is the Education Revenue Budget Report for period 9 up to the end of December 22. So the 22-23 education revenue budget is currently 94.389 million, and the latest projection...
Sorry, I'm not okay with committee, just carrying on.
Right. Can I hold you there, Ian? Are you okay?
No.
Right.
Absolutely not, because I've now got Councillor Wilson sitting laughing at me across the chamber. Can we stop things, please?
Can we have a 5-minute break, please? Is that okay? Can we have a wee 5-minute break from the committee, just to take stock? Okay. Liz, 5 minutes break, is that okay?
Section 3.3 of the report provides details of the main variances responsible for the projected underspend. And probably the main variance to note listed there is the underspend of 695,000 for teachers. And that includes 400,000 as a result of the teacher strike days. So that's new for this cycle. So committee are asked to note the projected underspend of 543,000 for the 22-23 education revenue budget, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ian. I'll check round the table first of all. Tommy?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. On the transport, sorry, overspend, am I correct to say you can never get addressed as part of the budget? And secondly, on the under recoveries of school meals and breakfast property, what we do to address that, or we can reassess the budgets from then? Thanks.
Can I bring Ruth in first? Ruth?
Yeah, so if I deal with the school meal first, so we were looking at the uptake of school meals and also the income and the expenditure on school meals. And Tony's got a group looking at that as part of our change management project anyway. We're aware of the increasing costs and decreasing income. So we're looking at different ways to address that. And through the SN Transport, additional support needs transport has just seen a significant increase in costs. We're aware of the overspend. We do need to keep monitoring it. But the bottom line is that we will keep providing transport where it's needed for those children who have significant needs and need the transport. There are no plans to reduce the provision at this moment, but we will need to keep looking at budgets and looking where we possibly have earmarked resources within first to take us through this. You'll know, as we previously reported to committee, the transport costs did go up and it's linked to the cost of fuel as well. So we will keep a watchful eye on what happens nationally, but I know speaking to other colleagues and other authorities, the central transport is particularly an issue across the country.
Tommy?
Yeah, look, thanks for this. I've no issue with it. I know you have to do the ESA and stuff, and that's fine. I'm just looking forward to budgets further down the line because of the current situation and what we're going to face next year. But thanks for your responses. Thanks, Convener.
Yeah. We've got James.
Thanks, Convener. I've got a question about page 39, appendix 3, specifically Gaelic transport. If I can just ask where we are with the provision for GME and Inverclyde going into the next academic term, given we've now removed the secondary transport.
Again, I'll put that to Ruth to answer if she can.
So through you, Convener, Mike was working with the parent group. As you know, it was requested by this committee to do a report on the different options and proposals, and we have asked the convener if we can have a special committee, a one-item agenda committee, to look at particularly that the time scales haven't worked for this committee, and we do think that it's worthy of a lot of discussion around different options. So we will bring a full report to this committee.
Is that okay, James?
Hi, that's fine. Thanks a lot, Ruth.
Any questions here? Nothing else online? And obviously there's a long-standing wish for the council to take in free school meals for primary schools as quickly as we can. So there's an underspend in free school meals. You know, there is that opportunity, hopefully at some point in time, that we'll be able to bring it in quicker than the national picture. So if we watch this space, I would think. And with that, can we agree the recommendations?
Yeah, sure.
And can we move to agenda item number 9, which is the Education Capital Programme? Eddie, would you like to take us through this?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. A small number of projects in the capital programme report. Just at the start, as confirmed verbally last time to committee, Group Primary School project is now complete. It was complete in December, and there's a note there in terms of the ongoing work in negotiating the final account. On the next item, in terms of the life cycle works, the current financial year's programme is drawing to a close, and we have been preparing for the next financial year's programme. There's a little bit of detail in there in terms of what projects we are looking to address. There'll be a number of pitch carpet replacements across the school estate at 3 secondary schools. We will continue the active panel refresh programme, and that will start replacing the first versions of the active panels that are out there in 4 primary schools, and we will be addressing some larger elements such as LED lighting upgrade projects, which will align with the kind of net zero activity and the council's strategy for that. We also will review the kind of PPP school life cycle programme, and that's just been submitted recently for us to review. In terms of the next item, free school meals, as a wee note there about the funding allocations, although I understand that there's been a review recently of the Scottish Government allocations, and the kind of future years allocations are now being revisited. So at the moment we only have the kind of 350k for the current financial year, and we await decisions on future allocations. And then the last item there, 1140 hours expansion, just a note on the concluding of the small number of projects that will see the last of that earmarked reserve completed. The work at Queen's Bay is almost complete, and Kings will be phased into the next financial year. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Eddie. I'll open up for any questions. Do we have any questions? Kirsty first.
I just wanted to speak about the free school meals in 3.6, just basically to say that I really welcome this being extended across primary school, and also to congratulate Bruce and the team for being ahead of the game with this implementation.
Ruth?
Through you, Convener, to be clear, we will be bringing the report back on our intentions for P67. Free school meals hasn't been through all of the final governance yet, but I know that you'll go through the budget process, that we are looking at everything we can do to make this process work as soon as possible.
And that is a wish from all of us, I think. Yeah. Any other questions? Thanks to anyone online. Thanks to Nelson. It is really good to see Gourock Primary finally getting finished. I'm sure we can all agree on that. It was turning into a wee bit like the Lady Alice Bowling Club, I'm afraid. It seemed to be going on and on and on. So it's good that it's finally come to an end, and hopefully it will be a good addition to the school. So with that in mind, can we agree the recommendations of 2.1?
Agreed.
And can we go to agenda item number 10, which is just the education update report of local and national initiatives, and I'll ask Milton to
For you, Nina, I'm going to take the first 4 bullet points of this and handle it through the bit. So within the report, we've updated you as we promised the last committee on key expected outcomes for 2 of the actions, that's Labour Family Centre and St Francis Nursery Plants. And then we note that in both settings they achieve good outcomes across the board, and each have one area that is probably very good or different. And I think that sits very much in line with the school, the individual setting is some evaluations, and we're just very pleased with that. And since the last committee, should we say that we haven't had any further inspection. Now that I've said it's something tomorrow, just to instead. 3.2, we're just updating about additional public holiday in respect of the coronation of King Charles III, and you notice that we have the exception fees closure for that. At 3.3, there is a link to further reports in line with the authorities to monitor quality outcomes, specifically in respect of education service, and I'll link to that report to be found there. At 3.4, we're trying to keep you abreast of national reform, and again, I don't know if this is a this report that have been an interim report that's come through in respect of qualifications review that's been made, giving us a sector hint as to what may be in scope, and that just came out this week, so we'll put up, we'll be able to find it online, but we'll maybe see more about that at the next committee, indeed when we know more so far in respect of reform of some of the other key organisations within Education Scotland. That is still something that we are waiting to hear more about. And at 3.5, there is an update there in respect of an announcement in relation to pupil numbers, the hours of the pupil week, and teaching up on the 3.5.
Ruth?
Yes, just to pick up in the appendix, you'll see the letter to all local authorities. So we are working away on the staffing for next year. We have been asked to maintain 781 teaching numbers, and it's surprisingly difficult to accurately tell how many teachers are in an authority at one time. Just because you have a budget for so many teachers doesn't mean that all those teachers are at work that week. You may have someone on sick leave, you may have the supply who's in there, being either the permanent supply for the authority or temporary supply. You may have people who are on secondment and there's backfill. So any week can look different in the authority's teacher numbers. Say the same people numbers. So it's not a straightforward process to look at what exactly that 781 will mean for us. But what I will say, and we will bring a further report back to this committee, is that we are losing significant amounts of money in the attainment challenge where we have employed teachers. So we will need to approach the Scottish Government to say with less money, here's what we will look at for Insight Council, because we have less grant fund coming forward. And also previously reported to this committee, you will know that we stream-up reserve post-COVID for the recovery teachers, and that was with the blessing of the Scottish Government. We will need to look at what the impact that will have on teaching going forward. But I promise I will bring you a full report into exactly what that means and the intricacies of what it means for the department.
Okay, thanks, Ruth. I'll bring Elizabeth in first. Elizabeth.
Thanks, Convener. I've got two things. One's a very quick question, because we're talking about local and national initiatives. I've taken my opportunity again to see if there's an update on getting a parent rep for this committee.
Yeah.
And then I've got another question after that.
So the update is we still do not have a parent rep. Having failed myself, Michael then took on the baton from me, and we still haven't yet got some representatives. We just promised them we'll try.
And I'm sorry, I'll keep asking. Probably.
No.
The second one, I don't really know how to progress this, how to deal with this, but I just do feel, and maybe I'm carrying on from my broad theme of Thursday at full council, but when it comes to the letter that we've got in the appendix here to the paper about the maintenance of people waiting teacher numbers, I kind of feel I would like to request that we write, or whoever is appropriate writes back to the Scottish Government about this particular issue. When I hear the Scottish Government say that local government and Scottish Government should be working together on shared outcomes upon which we all agree, my heart swells with hope and pride, and that's the way we should do things. But what I'm very aware of is that with this particular issue, we're looking at inputs into the system. I hate to reduce our teachers and the number of hours that we educate to inputs. What it is, what they are, it's not outcomes. And so having that dictate in terms of inputs has hamstrung us in terms of our budget process, and has also not drawn a line directly, I don't think, to what the anticipated or expected or agreed combined outcomes are. And so I'm wondering if, in a solution-focused way, we can go back to the Scottish Government with it. And again, I don't know, someone can advise me on how best to do so. I guess I'm asking for an additional recommendation on this paper, to sort of say, we believe in the shared outcomes upon which we all agree, but this is about inputs, not that.
I'll let Ruth, because we've discussed this exact point.
So there has been a lot of discussion through POSLA about this issue. What I would say is that it would be political matter about the outcomes rather than the numbers. But if the committee wants the convener to write a letter, that would be proposed that as something that we add to this.
I'm quite happy to do that, but I don't want it to be overtly political, so I'll let you say it before it sent us, if that's okay. It's just one of these things that you've got a line in the sand, and they take that day as the day when you're counting teachers. It seems an arbitrary decision that you've got to maintain your teachers despite being given money to have attainment teachers, despite having the money to go for that, and then you get that taken away, but you're still expected to keep the teachers. I know, and that is the issue that we've got. So I'm quite happy to get the advice off of Ruth and to help me do that, and I'm quite happy to share that with you before I send it. Any other questions? There's nothing online. Can we agree the report?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Tommy. I'm blocked with Diane.
The next report refers to SEF, Strategic Equity Fund, and we'll get PEF, People Equity Fund, and we'll get SAC, Scottish Achievement Challenge. So sometimes I don't know come on board where each are coming on board from, but in Ruth's recommendation, she's going to bring back a report on the number of teachers. Ruth, is it possible we can get a breakdown of that? FTEs, who's employed by PEF, attainment, temps, NQPs, just to give us a better understanding, because I do think quite confusing things. I don't know how you've gone with it.
Yeah.
Maybe another anecdote next month, you know.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ruth, I'm happy to do that. We'll make sure that's all broken down. Any other questions? Nothing online. Oh, Nelson, can we agree the recommendations? Okay, thank you. And we'll go to agenda item number 11, which is the Scottish Attainment Challenge refresh, and I'll bring Michael in on that one. Michael.
So you can bring us on the warm-up actually to the opposite piece of the introducing Mark Hoyle, who's the project lead for the Attainment Challenge, and maybe Mark could potentially do just to very quickly start with explain the difference between the Strategic Equity Fund, just to help set a bit of context. But we felt that having been to you previously to try and explain the change of direction, here we come back almost a year. This is our 25th financial year of the challenge to give you an update on where we are and where we're going. So, Mark, over to you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much for allowing me to share the progress of the Scottish Attainment Challenge Refresh Year 1 so far. Just for the context, as Michael said, the Strategic Equity Fund is the overall fund which we use to support the key actions for the work streams identified within the agreed plan, the SEF plan. The Pupil Equity Fund is the funding that goes directly to establishments, to head teachers, and that supports the closing of the poverty-related attainment gap through various interventions that meet the context within each establishment. And the last part of the Attainment Challenge Fund is the Care Experience Fund, and that's the fund that Susan was speaking about earlier on, the adoption of a virtual head teacher and the supports that go along to support our care experience young people. I hope that clarifies and provides a wee bit of context for the Attainment Challenge itself. In terms of the kind of highlights for this year, as project lead, I've assumed the responsibility for managing and overseeing all the projects, the Strategic Equity Fund, the Pupil Equity Fund and the Care Experience Fund. And that has led to a very clear plan with clear outcomes and appropriate measures tied into a logic model which we were supported by Education Scotland and our attainment advisor, Liz Somerville, to create. That allowed us through the Strategic Equity Fund to increase collaboration with our partners to create this plan. It focused on work streams that could deliver the outcomes within that plan. We are continually to effectively use data to support our improved decision making. The ongoing development of that is the data strategy, which we had a very constructive meeting yesterday. And we will continue to move forward with our data strategy to provide a sustainable model to support establishments and senior managers in the use of a variety of data sets, but also in how that interrogation can lead to improved outcomes. We've been very targeted in our support for establishments, particularly attainment challenge establishments, used an early intervention approach aimed at primary 1 to 3 pupils who are in cohorts SIMD 1 and 2. We've also tied our outreach teachers in with supporting stretch aims for primary 4 and primary 7 pupils in literacy and numeracy. Continued support by our CMOs, our coaching and modelling officers, deliver evidence-based approaches to practitioners in establishments, and that really focuses on improving pedagogy and increases confidence of the workforce. We have got ongoing developments in the use of the Attainment Challenge Head Teachers meeting to increase the opportunities for collaboration around data sharing, establishment priorities and PEF planning so that head teachers can work effectively together. Through the Strategic Equity Fund approach, we have a sustainable strategy aimed at supporting improvements through high quality training. We are in the process of creating a PACE webblog, which is Pedagogy and Support for Equity. This is a facility which stores all the Attainment Challenge resources and videos and these can be accessed by practitioners and establishments as and when they require. Incorporated pause reflection points within each of the videos, so that allows the practitioners and the establishments to use the training resources very effectively. We have identified a process to support the identification of our ambitious stretch aims for the core and for core plus targets, and these are tied directly to the SEF plan and the logic model. It provided a really good opportunity for, and being a small authority, I was very privileged to have the opportunity to meet with head teachers, to use the data dashboard and drill down to individual pupils, to look very carefully at their attainment, their progress, and to see how we could provide interventions that could support those pupils. And again, within the Strategic Equity Fund, we have a very clear governance structure that provides that support and challenge regarding the ongoing processes and future planning for the Strategic Equity Fund. In terms of the Pupil Equity Fund highlights, again, we have really nailed and drilled down into clear guidance that's been provided to establishments to make sure that we are supporting that equity agenda. All establishment plans are reviewed and feedback is provided by our attainment advisor and education officers. I also, along with the attainment advisor, provide support for establishments in relation to providing clear planning around equity. We have improved tracking and monitoring of spends and actions to ensure that funds are used within the guidelines and are used to address the poverty-related attainment gap within the context of each establishment. And through this improved tracking and monitoring, we've observed a significant reduction in any potential carry forward that we may have had. Through our triannual tracking, that's followed up with dialogue with establishments to ensure that the implementation of PEF plans remain as a high priority, and offer advice when the plans maybe don't come to fruition, if there has been maybe retention issues around staffing. And the final aspect would be the Care Experienced Young People Fund, and I don't think I need to provide much detail. Susan has covered a huge amount of ground, a very comprehensive presentation and her role and the impact of her role so far. And I would just like to say I was delighted to be able to work alongside her to provide that support and for our Care Experienced Young People. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Can I open up to questions? I'll get Francesca first and then David.
Thanks very much, Convener, and thanks very much, Mark, for that update. So you've just outlined, as does the report, all the significant, really significant achievements of the first year of the refreshed Scottish Achievement Challenge programme, and so thank you very much for that. There's so much work going on. I don't know if anyone else is a fan of Abbott Elementary, the TV series, and they'll know that Ava, the principal in that programme, has lots of funny episodes of misspending funds, so it's delightful to see that in section 4.4 about PEF there's absolutely no chance of that happening here in Inverclyde. Not that there ever would be, that it's really robust setups to make sure the funds are spent as in the best way possible. It's not to diminish at all the achievements, but I suppose there is still a reduction in the funding that Inverclyde's receiving in the SAC. And I was just wondering if you could say anything about what that means in real terms. What is it we're missing out on with that reduction in funding?
I'm more an optimist, to be honest. I look for the sustainability aspect. We've had the attainment challenge for over 5 years now. The 5-year report was very complimentary and very positive of the practice that's been embedded so far. So my role is to continue that and make sure that practice continues to be embedded and that the actions that we follow are the right course of direction for the attainment challenge. We work closely with other authorities through a SAC network so that we can learn from one another. We will continue the sustainability angle. We will consciously make the efforts to target our interventions at the areas, the families and the children that really need those interventions, and continually strive to improve the quality of learning and teaching and assessment so that impacts positively on the outcomes for our children.
Thanks, Mark. Francesca, is that okay? David?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. 4.4, the Pupil Equity Fund, the third paragraph, primary schools with similar demographics have been grouped into families. Could you give me examples of that, please?
Yeah, so we look at the SIMD demographic for each establishment, and we have put kind of similar schools with similar backgrounds and similar SIMD data together so that they can share practice with one another. We do that for collaborative reasons so that they can identify where best to spend PEF and learn from one another. It's also a very good opportunity for schools who don't have a huge amount of PEF funding to look to see how other schools in a similar demographic are using that fund, specifically to target that equity agenda.
Could you give me an example of perhaps a couple of groups?
Yeah, a couple of schools. So, for example, the schools that I used to be. Sorry.
You want to answer?
So, through you, Convener. So this is very similar to the way the virtual schools would work, and you'll have seen, you'll be experts by now in how we use Insight, and we do our virtual comparisons with schools. So basically, we take schools with similar demographics to be able to compare the different types of results they will get. I don't think it's appropriate at this point to perhaps say the exact demographics and the groups we use. It's secondary, it's a well-used resource to be able for schools to be able to compare like with like, and we're doing the same with our schools.
I think it's a good idea, but it might have been helpful to give an example. Maybe some of our schools in my ward.
So through you, conveners, to try and help us explain further. So all the primary schools, the schools in Inverclyde are grouped together geographically in clusters, but within each cluster will be a range of demographic. What we're saying is we've as well as them being working as a cluster and from transition and various other things, we also group them together in different ways. It could be that different schools from different parts of the authority come together because they have similar characteristics around, as Marcus described, their SIND percentages, so that you can be sure that they are really learning from other schools that are serving a similar context and have a similar amount of funding, and they're learning from one another in a different way. So they might be working as a family across different clusters because their demographics are similar.
You're not telling me?
No. Can I ask? Is that okay, David? You had your answer, but
I've got an
can I invite?
I've got an answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Looking at 5.2 in finance, it's over £5 million is coming to Inverclyde. Is that, do you get that funding on a year-to-year basis, or do you have any insight into how long it's going to last, or do you just take your chances and see what you get on an annual basis? That's the way it works.
So people equity funding we have committed now until I think the end of the life of Parliament, so that we know that will remain in place. The care experience young people funding, we know that will remain in place. We also do know what we're doing with the Scottish Employment Challenge funding or the strategic equity funding. And we know that Inverclyde will lose money, as previously reported to this committee. They haven't taken the whole of Inverclyde's money at once. They've done that over a 3 to 4 year phase basis. And the rationale behind that is that they've kept the overall pot the same, but they've distributed it differently across Scotland, taking into account that all authorities will have some sort of quality in their areas, and also taking into account that the initial pathfinders for the attainment challenge were meant to be exactly just that. It was meant to look at finding ways of addressing the equity.
So you've got 3 years temporary funding, which you're aware of. What challenge is that giving you when you're planning your workforce and how you're going to progress ahead, and all the other things you've got to do to try and improve education attainment? So what challenge does that give you with temporary funding rather than funding certainty?
So where we have ring-fenced temporary funding, we can't then put permanent posts in there, because if you only have a temporary funding source, then putting a permanent post against that will be very, very difficult. And that's what we saw at the beginning of the attainment challenge. Where all of them could put lots of posts in, but all the posts were temporary and people were wanting permanent posts. So we do know that all of this funding will come to an end at some point at the end of the Parliament. And so it will give Michael and the team who are doing staffing every year an increasing nightmare looking at which funding source is paying for which resource, and it will be teachers and support assistants. As well as that, at this point, people will be promoting up years of service as well. So it will be looking at having a fair wage, looking at people who have been on temporary contracts for now over 2 years, and looking at what that will mean for the permanent positions that are there. But it will be, so temporary funding from our point of view can be very, very complicated to work through.
Great, thanks Ruth, that's helpful, thank you.
And Tommy, obviously that goes back to our earlier discussion with regard to teacher numbers as well, and it's very important that we get that paper back. And obviously what Ruth says, she can't be too political on it, but if you actually think, if the cake is still the same size, but it was meant to be specifically for attainment challenged authorities, which we were, it means what they've done is diluted that around the whole of Scotland. Now, if you were an authority that wasn't getting money before, and now we're getting money, then you're going to be happy. But you're an authority that was getting more because the need was more, and they've taken that away, like ourselves, then obviously that's when the problem's biting in, especially when you've employed teachers to go along with that money you've got. So, sorry, that's where the difficulty is, and no doubt when we get the paper back again, we'll be able to explore that further, if that's okay with you.
Yep, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, can't see anything online, nothing here. Can we agree the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. The next agenda item is budget update. Agenda item number 12. Ruth, you're going to start with that?
So the same way the new Chiefs Committee, when we gave the information of the exact impact to the host committee, this was looking at the rank 40 budget and the grant reduction taken through the budget process. So there is a reason there's a reduction in the funding. One is because it's a specific grant. The money was given to us as a specific grant, therefore it has to look at the pay increase. That's what all specific grants do in the council. And also we were given £320,000 less than the previous year because of the redistribution of the funding model. I would have to say, given our previous conversation, that this is not anything that we're expecting to be taken away. We're seeing the funding model more settling down from how it was previously distributed. So if you look at the proposals in section 4, that gives an overview of all the different areas we have looked at, the different impacts, and the appendix gives an overview of the monetary value of that. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ruth. I'll open up to questions. Can't see any questions. Can we agree the report? Thank you. And the appendix was just the way already I discussed. So can I thank you very much for your attendance today? It's much appreciated. Thank you.